Thanks for joining us. I'm in conversation with John Chambers, now a venture capitalist, former chair and CEO of Cisco. Also with us is Umesh Sachdev, CEO of Unifor, one of the companies that John is invested in, among the 16 companies that John is invested in across the world. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us.
It'll be a lot of fun.
John, I want to begin this conversation about asking you about your investments, your venture investments across the world. This is an interesting company that you picked here in India. But before I get to the details of why Unifor, what do you look for when you invest in a company? What's the X factor? What do you find interesting?
Well, I believe that the startups will be the entire job creator for the next decade, both in India, Europe, and in the US. The large companies will not expand their headcount. In fact, because of artificial intelligence and automation, probably decrease it. So this is something that I think is very key to every country's future job creation. What I look for in terms of the startups is really predictable. I'm a believer in an innovation playbook. In fact, actually, I have a copy of my book for you later that we'll give to you. But it talks about getting a company, a startup that is in both a business market transition model as well as a technology market transition. It could be an Amazon type discussion, an Uber type discussion, etc. The second thing I look for is a young CEO in mind who really thinks out of box, who knows what she or he knows and knows what they don't. So you really need very top players who are wicked smart. The third thing I do is I go straight to the customers. There was only one Steve Jobs. He just somehow knew how to build things. It still took him 7 to 10 years to do it. I've always, whether it was my 180 acquisitions I did at Cisco or now my startup selection, I go to their top customers, the MetLifes of the world, et cetera, the PNBs, the Coca-Colas, and say, what do you really think of this company? Then I try to pick a company that's right at the beginning of an inflection point. I look for opportunities to grow 100% year over year, and they can really, I can say this now, being small companies, dominate their industry in a really fun way, and with customers who truly love them.
I want to talk about technology as well, and AI is not just a buzzword anymore. People are investing serious amount of money in AI-based backed startups. How have you seen the evolution of AI and in Silicon Valley and the kind of stuff that's going on here in India?
Well, if you watch most technologies, people get very excited about it too early, and about the time they give up on it, then it comes back up. There might be two exceptions to that. One was the internet, and secondly is artificial intelligence. It is one that is going to impact our lives in a very positive way in many ways, but also dramatically change productivity and destroy jobs on the other. So I look for companies that really understand the power of artificial intelligence and how do you bring that to normal conversation, if you will, voice in a very unique way. But unlike perhaps cryptocurrency or even blockchain that people get very excited about and then very cold about, I think AI will be the example that will actually exceed people's expectations.
Umesh, this coincides to your journey. You began, 10 years ago or Unifor journey began about 10 years ago, and you started with deep technology in natural language, and you were really in AI when AI was not the buzzword. Am I right in saying that? And the question really is, what is the problem that you were attempting to solve when you started out?
Gotcha. So our journey, like you said, 10 years ago in a lab at IIT Madras, so we're a good example of Indian university incubation. We don't hear a lot of them. There's a lot of examples in the Silicon Valley. We started off as a company doing deep tech in speech and natural language. Like you said, AI wasn't sort of the word at the time. And it's safe to say now that we're sort of growing and global and all of that we're potentially earlier than our time before the market sort of opened up for our kind of technology. What we set out to do in the world with the combination of the technologies that we have built is to realize that in a commodity like business, which most businesses are, the biggest differentiation is going to be customer experience. And while most CEOs believe that they're great at customer experience, when you ask most customers, we believe that the businesses aren't serving them really well. And so to reimagine the whole customer service industry, the whole call center industry that candidly India and parts of Asia had disrupted 25 years ago by bringing call center jobs here, but to now say that now that AI and analytics and voice recognition and NLP are coming together in a very interesting way that hasn't happened in the past, you can now completely reimagine how we interact with businesses on their call centers to dramatically increase efficiency of current call center representatives when they speak to consumers, and yet another sort of beginning to say that there are so many repetitive conversations for which we have to wait in a queue and hear that your call may be important to us, correct, to now have a voice assistants coming in and take over those tasks. So, like you said, our journey had been, in broadly speaking, these 10 years in 3 phases. The first phase is really building out the deep tech, validating the technology, improving. The next phase, beginning to be an enterprise product company and beginning to sell it to Indian customers first. And now in this phase of growth, where the inflection point is very visible, is global expansion. 2.5 years ago, we went to Asia. My co-founder moved to Singapore. We're seeing dramatic growth in the Far East and the Asia Pacific. Last year, I moved to the Silicon Valley in the US, potentially our biggest market. And again, we are beginning to see dramatic growth. So it's a clear example of an Indian company which built dramatic deep tech in India, in a lab in IITs, tested out with Indian customers first at scale, and now is going on to do world domination.
Interesting.
I love the word domination. But what you're seeing is, as artificial intelligence really began to gain momentum and Umesh's skill sets varied versus competitors, he was getting 100% year-over-year growth. In the last year, he's up to 300%. And now we believe, it's easy for me to say as his business partner advisor, then I look at him to make it happen, that he can sustain that 300% growth for a number of years in the future. So all of a sudden, you begin to think about a company doing $9 million in revenue at the present time and orders, and you think about being $100 million in 3 years from now. I mean, that is the type of numbers that get very excited, and that's a unicorn plus some.
Interesting that. I'm going to come to that point in just a bit. John, the fact that Uniphore began its journey in a university in India, yes, and you're on record to say that the next Silicon Valley is going to be in India, and first question is, how do you think we've fared? India has fared on that front. And secondly, we're also talking at a time in India when there is a serious debate on lack of jobs, and startups being sort of the biggest, creator of jobs. Yes. What's your view on both these things?
My view on both of those are actually very positive. If you think about it, and remember, I made India my second world headquarters at Cisco over almost 20 years ago. Sure. So hugely committed to the country in terms of talent, but it never fulfilled its opportunity in terms of innovation and job creation. India was known as a very slow follower, not the place for innovation. That has dramatically changed in the last 5 years. India is now leading in innovation in many ways. The startup community actually doubled the amount of funding that went into this last year. The number of unicorns, those with $1 billion capitalization being financed by venture capital, et cetera, went from 8 to 18. India went to the #1 M&A opportunity in Asia, blew right past China. And so you suddenly see these engines start to occur. However, this is also where I think people in India have to understand that startups, and Umesh is a great example of it, really don't add dramatic headcount until they get to the 3rd and 4th fundraising approach. And when they become unicorns to go IPO, that's where 75% of the jobs get created. So I'm more after what is your headcount growing per year, and it's currently growing at about 50% plus per year, and the ability to sustain that. And so if you got the startup engine going, which I think the Prime Minister Modi actually did a very good job of on ease of doing business, goods and services tax, demonetization, bankruptcy code changes, which had to occur for this engine to go in this country, then as you get your startups, it's almost 5 years before they really start to hit a stage where you start to add a lot of job creation in terms of the bigger numbers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Picking on that point, and you earlier mentioned that, how you disrupted, or India was the pioneer of the call center industry or the BPO industry, and you in a sense disrupted that, or at least attempting to disrupt that. How and when did you realize that you actually are sitting on a service or a solution that could have global scale, and could be, could have a significant impact on B2B?
Gotcha. So are we disrupting the call center industry? I think the answer is a clear yes. And the answer is also related to what John said in the beginning about artificial intelligence, that it's going to impact humanity in a good way. We believe that in the call centers, AI coming in is going to serve customers in a dramatically better way than the current processes are. And at the same time, it's going to create some job disruption, that the current jobs will move to other tasks in the future, etc. Sure. And so it's telling that some of our biggest customers and partners around the world are the same BPO companies, which the fun of being around for 10 years is I've been with some companies in the BPO space who've said, you're disrupting our market, you're probably not the best company to partner with, to now no less than the presidents and CEOs of these companies embracing our technology and saying, we better be part of the disruption or be disrupted ourselves. So clearly, it's the need of the hour in terms of customer service. That having human capacity to take lots of calls, and it's still growing around the world, is not sort of the answer of the future. The technology is here to make it dramatically better. When did we realize? I think all through our journey, first, customers have played a major role in helping us realize the potential of our products, the direction of the products. And also, I would say some of our biggest customers, some of the biggest banks around the world who early on took bets on our product, were the ones to say, why are you only thinking of India? Your products, your technology seems relevant and ready for a US market or a Singapore market or a Korea market, etc.
Is that after investors like John came on board? Or?
I think investors, we've had 4 rounds of funding so far. I think investors have played a critical role in sort of giving us the right direction. Having a mentor, advisor, and investor with John at this stage is just tremendously valuable. As we grow from a company growing from 100% growth, which was dramatically fast, to a company which is now beginning to do 300% growth. So not only are we sustaining, we're accelerating growth as we grow bigger. As somebody who's sort of doing it for the first time, it's easy for an entrepreneur to get intimidated with this growth. But as somebody who's seen this movie, so many times,
both the good and the bad, made the mistakes as well as the successes.
Absolutely, it's a tremendous sort of trump card to have by our side. Whether it's about thinking about how do I build a leadership team which is now global. We're not anymore in a small office. We're a global team. How do we think about putting customer and partners and channels in place for even faster growth? How do we think about customer success? There was a point in time where every customer I knew, on what's happening on a daily basis, to now, getting that data on a weekly or a fortnightly basis. So how do we scale those processes? And so having a mentor like John at this stage of growth is just an invaluable asset.
Once you've grown an organization from 400 people to 75,000, once you've acquired 180 companies, you recognize the key characteristics. And when I saw Umesh at an MIT event, recognizing the top startups in India, it was 8 of the very top ones, and they were really good. But he stood out by the furthest amount in terms of the opportunity. And then we didn't know for sure until we brought his architecture to the U.S., and we would have been ecstatic if this year it had grown 1 million. It grew to 3 million, from 0 to 3 million. And that's in the most competitive market there is. So when 95% of what used to be human interactions is now automated. The ability to do that in a very easy to use, in a way that makes that interaction even more effectively and summarizes the call data-wise is a huge competitive advantage.
Okay. Well, John, while we talk so much about startups, I want to sort of talk also a little bit about the big traditional industries that are getting disrupted. You're on record to say 40% of Fortune 500 will become irrelevant or will shut down.
In 10 years. Not in 20 or 30, but 10 years.
Why?
It's classic. And understand, and you almost use these words as verbs now. You get Uber, you get Netflix, you get Amazon. And what happens is you get a business model or a government model in transition enabled by technology at the same time. And if you don't get ahead of that, you get left behind and disrupted very quickly. Secondly, these companies keep doing the right thing too long. And one of the challenges for the Indian large enterprise companies who are listening now is you've traditionally not worked with startups. America learned a long time ago, and it's accelerating. These startups actually enable you to innovate even faster, to where you have an amazing company like Boeing that is as good as it gets in the aerospace industry, partnering with a startup of about 200 people out of Texas in artificial intelligence, equally owned joint venture to change the architecture for the FAA for unmanned aircraft.
So is that the recommendation, that large companies will have no choice but to acquire or partner with smaller companies, frankly, in some cases, to survive?
Yes, but it's not as simple as that. The large companies have to reinvent themselves and to partner or acquire, but often partner with smaller companies for the innovation combination. So it's going to be kind of a work of art on how you do the two of them together. But yes, I think that is the future. The majority of our young people, the IITs, Stanford, MITs of the world, Polytechnique in France, instead of going in to go to the large companies or large government organizations, they're saying, I want to go to the startups. That means that's where innovation is going to happen, job creation. The large companies who know the business and market transitions are going on and know they can't keep doing things the way they used to, those are the companies that I think will learn how to partner with startups.
Let me give you an example of exactly this as we see it. Without taking names on the BPO space, the industry that we work very intimately with, a president of a Texas-based BPO, they're 30-some billion in size. Their other competitors, 60-plus billion in their size. And without taking names, I'm sort of giving out the size of these companies. These are software companies around the globe. And the president of the company who partners with us and says, my larger competitor has scale advantage, I have you.
Fair.
When they win contracts, they're winning hundreds of millions worth of contracts where Unifor might be a small part. But the technology that Unifor gives to them and it gives them a competitive edge and helps them win customer orders. And I think that's what we're beginning to see. Like John said, I haven't seen it in the 10 years as much as it's happening now. Okay. It's certainly happening a lot more in the US and the Western world. India and Asia are catching on.
Okay. I want to talk about the consumer with you, Umesh. When a consumer is interacting with a bot, yes, there is the obvious question of data privacy and security that comes up. I mean, our limited interactions as an end consumer is with Alexa or with Siri. Yeah. What do you feel about it? Is that a cause of concern, or is that early stage of the consumer sort of cycle where he will learn about it and get comfortable with it?
I like this question, by the way. I want to see how you answer it.
Part of the coaching with John is to learn how to take tough questions as well, and so he's now watching me.
Yeah. And what I just did also in terms of coaching, I bought him a couple seconds to think about his answer.
So my view, Harsha, on this one is that, as we've all seen with the growth and dramatic growth of companies like Facebook, which started off as a good startup idea and suddenly grew into dramatically large business, that it's becoming hard to ignore the question of privacy and security. And any and all of us who are sort of endeavoring to build large businesses with our technology startups, it's now become important to make that as part of our architecture from the get-go. Sure. And not be left behind and worry about it when we are,
the regulator wakes up and tells you.
Exactly. Yeah. And so as someone who's sort of trying to impact the enterprise voice industry, and by the way, Siri and Alexa are consumer products and not enterprise. Correct. When we do bots in the enterprise space, for example, PNB MetLife in India has launched a bot called Khushi, which is built on our technology, and that's an enterprise bot. That's a very different architecture than an Alexa and Siri. But as somebody who's sort of deeply going to be a part of the leadership and quote-unquote domination of the voice bots and the voice assistant industry, I am sort of careful and cautioned in sort of making sure that at least with our products and at an industry level, we take care of these things from an architecture perspective right now. Sure. And not let it become a concern where consumers of the future, and people like myself, candidly, would worry about using these products. We don't want that scenario to happen.
John, what would you be telling an entrepreneur sitting in India today if he were to scale his business, seek funding to fulfill his ambition? What should he be focusing on?
Well, I think the first thing is to have the courage to dream. In India, we tend to be a little bit critical of ourselves, and even though this is the fastest growing nation in the world economically, and one that is really getting its act together on ease of doing business, we tend to be unbelievably tough on ourselves. So first is, you're in the right country at the right time. If I were betting a startup anywhere in the world done right, it would be India now and then expand. The second is to really understand and catch a market in transition. Don't try to do what other people have already done and try to do it better. You're never going to win or survive in that type of approach. Third, I'd say be customer driven. Listen to your customers in terms of what they want to do and how to do it. And so if you watch and bring that back to what Amesh has done so very well, this is all about conversational AI. It's all about how voice is the next interface. It's all about the customer experience that moves from something that is not pleasant and very cumbersome and a lot of human resources involved to how you completely transform that and make it very useful in terms of the exchange. And then I would have fun. I think at times people lose that issue. And I'd also have the courage to fail. And that's hard in India. In the US, probably 2/3 of the startups that I'm funding there have had major setbacks in their careers. And I'm actually more interested with those that have gotten knocked down and learned how to get up than I have one that has never got started before.
Last word, Umesh. Same question. For an entrepreneur watching this who wants funding, what would be your advice?
Well, I think for the first thing, funding shouldn't be sort of the end goal. Funding is like any other thing, is the fuel in the tank. It's the resource that you need to grow your rocket ship and take it to the orbit and the end point that you really desire. A lot of entrepreneurs sometimes confuse funding with success. It isn't. If anything, it sort of puts a higher responsibility on the entrepreneur and the company to deliver on the promise that it did. But I think fundamentally to realize that if you have picked a space for yourself, which is a dramatically big market, in John's word, if you have dreamt big of solving a big thing, and you have built a product or a solution which is getting validation and lots of interest from customers, whether it's B2C or B2B, then that's the right point to approach investors. So really think of being in a large market, dream big, build something that really meaningfully solves a problem and has validation. And I think the funding is a natural outcome to that process.
Umesh, John, thank you so much for your time.
It was our pleasure. Thank you for having us on your show. And look forward to next time. I think the dreams that we outlined today, actually, we will overachieve in the future.
Sure. Good luck with that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Harshit.
Over